Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. We are very excited today. I'm once more joined, as always, by Maggie Parke.
Still live, still in person.
Still in person. Still in that delightful season of the year when Maggie is over here in the US, so that we're
taking advantage of it.
Yeah, exactly. Able to actually be together before she heads back home to Wales. But we're also joining you once again from these marvelous facilities here at Studio Lab in Derry, New Hampshire. I'm really excited to be back here again. You see on the beautiful wall behind us a collection of images by John Howe, because it is our very great pleasure to be joined today live by John Howe himself. Really looking forward to a conversation today about visual adaptation. John, welcome to Other Minds and Hands. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's just kind of begin first. I mean, obviously, we'll get around to talking about some specific things about the Rings of Power. That's, of course, what a lot of people are thinking about right now. But we really, we've, in Other Minds and Hands, we're really interested in the whole process of adaptation and kind of trying to put specific adaptations, such as the Rings of Power, in the context of the whole creative process of adaptation and how sort of that works. And of course, you have had such a wonderful and illustrious career as an artist in general, and a Tolkien artist in particular, going back, of course, working now on the Rings of Power, working before with Peter Jackson on the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films, and then, stretching back to your artwork before that as well. Mm-hmm. So just thinking about your, how this works, tell us about your
journey.
Yeah, your journey. How did you kind of get started in this whole world of doing Tolkien adaptations?
Oh my goodness. I'm not really quite sure I recall. I read the books when I was in my early teens, and it's a story I've unfortunately had to tell many, many times, but because I couldn't buy the books, I had to get them from the local library. And because everyone takes Fellowship of the Ring out for a month and never takes out the other ones, I waited and waited and waited for Fellowship to turn up. It didn't, so I read The Two Towers, The Return of the King, and finally read The Fellowship of the Ring, thinking this book makes no sense. The plot's and so I had a very, regrettable first reading of The Lord of the Rings, but I went back and reread it again a few years later in the right order. And it was a very adolescent read through that time. I really retained the battles and the epic episodes and all of the pathos and all of the drama.
Right.
And it's only going back in my later teens, when I was in art school, when I finally decided, oh, well, this would be worthwhile really trying to illustrate. And I was encouraged by the appearance of the first Tolkien calendars, where I realized that it was possible to illustrate Lord of the Rings and have the work published. And I believe I endlessly pestered HarperCollins publishers until they finally relented and out of desperation allowed me to do something.
That's amazing.
And then one thing led to another, and here we are.
Yeah, the Tolkien calendar is how I was first introduced to your work. I still have, well, I don't still have the calendar because I cut it up so that I could put your images on the wall, because I wasn't content to flip the calendar, you see. So I cut them out and I put them on my wall with Funtac when I was in high school. And but yeah, your image of Glorfindel and the Balrog, of Éowyn and the Nazgul, of Sam and Shelob were some of the images that just really captured me. And really one of the first times that I had that kind of interaction with a visual adaptation, really. I was really just sort of enthralled by those images, fascinated that, like you just described, like, hey, this exists. Like, this is there are people who do this, who make images of this, and I was fascinated by that. So so let's talk a little bit about that process. So I know that there are a lot of people who seem to, just from conversations that I've had with people, I get the impression that there are a lot of people who feel that the the visual adaptation process should be simple, right? I mean, it's described in the book. You read the description in the book, and you make the picture of what's described in the book, right? I mean, that's the way that people seem to sort of talk about that. But of course, there's a great deal more to it than that, right?
Yeah,
so I'd love to hear.
That's a very discouraging
Right.
reduction of the process, really.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I honestly believe that, of course, you must not, or you should not contradict the book that you are illustrating. You should have that much respect for the author and the text. But I find what's more interesting than what's in the book is what's not in the book.
Mm.
And that's one of Tolkien's, or one of many of Tolkien's great gifts, is that he doesn't spend a huge amount of time describing things in detail. He rarely gives us an item by item description of any person or thing. What he does give us is the emotions of those people who see that place or meet that person, their impression. And that's much more informative than any description that you can give.
Oh.
And, you know, if you were to take Tolkien literally, then Gandalf's brows stick out farther than the rim of his hat,
Right.
which is a little awkward, unless he has a very narrow-rimmed hat. And so I think that of course what the text doesn't say, but also the context that it was written in, the things that the author admired, his or her sources, all of those things are part of the process.
So in that respect, how much work did you do before putting pen to paper? Did you find yourself doing a lot of research, or do you just sit with the ideas?
Oh, I really should practice what I preach, because I honestly don't do a lot of research unless that necessity rears its ugly head. I prefer to read a text and then just see what happens, what comes out. And quite often an image will just appear.
Mm.
And I've learned from long experience that image that appears spontaneously, intuitively, possesses some kind of connection that I may not yet understand because I haven't quite done my research, but some intimate, multi-pronged connection with the text. And that means that it's trustworthy in that sense. Then, of course, you can go back in and bring in your experience, your knowledge, your craft, and take it a step further. But I'm a great believer in this. I almost feel like a matchmaker sometimes, you know, in the sense that I'm like a dating site. The text on one side is swiping, right or left, and the images are going to appear, and the right one will stick.
Right.
That's lovely. Well, and it makes so much sense when you're talking about the text being an emotive thing that shows you visuals. It sounds like you're doing the same thing. There's no need for you to research because you're having the same emotive experience. Just hit my mic.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, it does depend. You know, the research is an element of it, but it's not necessarily an element that intervenes regularly or systematically. And I think that we do, you know, especially those of us who've made the decision that we are the most comfortable in fantasy, that necessitates a lot of research, because fantasy is our world with an extra layer or several extra layers. So that knowledge is useful and important, and I want to be able to draw on that knowledge and not do what I've come to call design by default, where you simply draw something because you don't know better. You need to know all these things, and to have a nodding acquaintance with art history, architecture, costume, weapons, armor, even biology, botany, geology, you name it. All of those things are of interest because they can be an ingredient in your recipe.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Going back to a comment that you just made before about Tolkien not describing things a lot. It's interesting because, of course, I think a lot of readers would immediately kind of rear back and say, wait a second, what are you talking about? Tolkien is so full of landscape descriptions, it's boring, right? I mean, that's one of the chief complaints people have about it. But I think I see exactly what you mean. He spends a lot of time talking about the landscape, but he doesn't describe, he doesn't tell you what you're seeing. Right. He tends to give impressions and use metaphors more than he gives an actual visual description.
It's not a travel guide. It really is a series of impressions, and I mean that comes out strongly through his experience in the Alps when he was 19. Right. I'm sure you know Tolkien in the summer of 1911 spent 10 days hiking from Interlaken across the Alps to the Valais and exited near Sion, and those impressions are right through The Hobbit. Mm-hmm. And on into Lord of the Rings. And frustratingly, he didn't keep an actual detailed diary of his trip, which would have made us all very happy. Right. But from that point, it's easy to imagine that here is a young Englishman who's abroad for basically the first time in his life. Although he was born in South Africa, he was very young when he moved to the UK. So we can say this was his first European tour. And here he is in the most beautiful part of Switzerland, hiking through the Alps in 1911. This is before hydro dams, high tension power lines, ski lifts, ski resorts. These are the Alps that we'll never know again. And you can just imagine the impression that must have made. And so powerful that it comes through whenever he talks about a mountain range or mountains in any of his work. There's something of Switzerland in there, of that first impression.
Yes. It makes that line of Bilbo's in chapter 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring when he says to Gandalf, I want to see mountains again. Yeah. Right? It makes that really poignant, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's very beautiful. And and I think that I do believe it is a little bit of an error to try and pinpoint every location in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit on a map of Switzerland. Right. But you can pinpoint that atmosphere and that emotion that can be generated by this incredible encounter. And once again, a Switzerland that none of us will ever know.
Right. But yes, even again, coming back to the descriptions thing, even within the text, that line that just popped into my head is, of course, Gandalf's description of Frodo in his letter to Butterbur, like that he gave to Butterbur, right? When Butterbur relays Gandalf's description, right? Instead of saying, he's this high, this is his hair color, these are his distinguishing markings or whatever, he says he's a perky chap with a bright eye, right? That's like, even there again, he's trying to convey something about his character rather than actually, just giving the details, right, of a physical.
And that affords an incredible latitude to anyone who's going to tackle it visually.
Yeah.
Because how do you depict, a perky eye and a perky character and a bright eye? Yeah. Well, you've got a lot of room to maneuver.
Right.
And I really appreciate that liberty, if you like, that guided liberty, I think is perhaps the best term for it.
Yeah. So what did you have another follow-up question?
No, I'm really enjoying just hearing you talk about the description based on word. I'm just really enjoying this in our bigger conversation we've been having about adaptation, because you're basically setting something visually based off of a few words, but it builds an entire scene. So you can have a perky glint in someone's eye, but that gives an entire feeling to what we're going to be visually interpreting. So yeah, it just fits in well with our conversation about text versus visual as a medium.
And Tolkien, who is someone who was, reticent about having his work illustrated, was certainly not above doing it himself.
Right.
And you can understand this sort of inner energy which needs somewhere to go. And there are times when an idea, and this is something I've been experiencing lately, where I've been working on a book, but also working on the illustrations for it. And sometimes the idea appears, and it can take the form of words, or it can just as easily take the form of a picture or a sketch. And then it can move from one to the other, and one leads, this leads back and forth. Of course, I think I'm not as good a writer as I am with a pencil drawing, but I can appreciate the wellspring of these ideas is the same. Because it takes two extremely different forms, we consider it different sorts of creation. But it's simply the way that the way that the audience receives it. They're going to receive a book with words, or they're going to receive images. And they become, therefore, two different things because they need to be interpreted entirely differently. But in the beginning, they can proceed from exactly the same source.
Right.
Yeah. And that's thinking about Tolkien as a visual artist himself is one of the, so I've got a sort of a couple questions about that. One is, how much pressure do you feel coming from Tolkien's art itself, right? Because I mean, of course, on the one hand, with you doing illustrations of, say, a Middle-earth landscape, especially if it's a landscape that Tolkien has treated or Tolkien has sort of touched upon, how much pressure do you feel from his paintings as this sort of, there's the text, and then there's his paintings, and then what you're trying to do. How do you find yourself relating to his paintings?
I'm going to give you a very disappointing answer. Absolutely no pressure at all.
Hey,
okay.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's his interpretation of his work.
Right.
I find it fascinating and informative from an information point of view. It gives me another window into his thoughts, and that's also very precious. But it is certainly not a guide to pursuing anything on myself. And I'm actually it's actually quite amusing to see that Tolkien as well was grappling with the same problems that any visual artist does. And if you look at his famous drawing of the entrance of Bag End,
yes,
you will see that he's trying to find a way to solve the difficulties of hanging paintings on a curved wall.
Yeah,
right.
Right.
And take a look at that drawing. You'll see he's come up with two solutions, neither of which are necessarily satisfactory. But you can see him, coming to terms in the concrete from something which is in a text actually quite abstract.
Right.
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 Absolutely.
In a kind of a similar vein, I wonder, because so many of your images have become iconic to the entire readership and viewership, I don't think anybody can picture a hobbit hole without picturing that image behind us. Do you feel any kind of pressure from your own previous creations to maintain that, or is it then solidified in your brain once it's been created?
I'm going to give you a second disappointing answer. No
Right,
pressure
okay.
at all. I don't believe that anything is engraved in stone. I don't believe that any image is permanent in that sense, that it should dictate whatever you do following that. I think that obviously there are images which have a certain what's the word? I was going to say a certain strength, but that's not what I'm looking for. A certain efficiency, if you like, of somehow translating a text to an image, and those images obviously carry a certain weight, which makes them harder to ignore. But nonetheless, no, I don't honestly think that anything I've done obliges me in any way to continue on depicting them the same way. Maybe it's time I did a whole new Balrog. Maybe we need a new take on the Balrog.
Yeah,
That's exciting. All right.
it is exciting.
I mean, that's another question that fascinates me quite a lot, is how is it that images are created in public perception, in the collective consciousness, if you like. Because if you say the word dragon to literally everyone, they can tell you what it looks like. but no one's ever seen one. They've never existed.
Right.
We all know what they're like. And those images are syncretic. They've composed themselves over a long period of time, elements from different cultures. They've combined, they've changed, they, you know, they flow from one into another, and they end up being part of us. And if you look on the net and type in fan art Balrog, you'll see that there's pretty much, they're all of the same family. So in that sense, this is now shared culture.
Right.
Right.
And that's quite, I shouldn't say sobering, but it's actually, it gives me a lot of pleasure to see that happen. So that, you know, it's part of this process of what we see, you know, and that is really one of the foundations of modern fantasy, what we see, because we go into it with a lot of information. We're bringing in a lot when we go in to read a book that we've never opened before.
This is actually a perfect segue. We're getting a lot of questions. I'm not looking down at my lap. I'm keeping track of your questions while we're talking to John. But we've had a lot of questions about your process. And we were looking earlier at some of the images you sent over to us. And if it's okay to talk about Smaug's eye now, because you're talking about dragons, we were talking about your process in developing Smaug. And this beautiful sketch is not just an eyeball. There's so much that went into this that I wonder if you could just walk us through when somebody says draw a dragon. How deep do you go?
Tried to, we actually had a little trans-departmental team at Weta Digital working on Smaug, because Smaug's wingspan is so large, it covers many departments, from lighting to, you know, I mean, many different departments. And rather than everybody working on their own,
love it.
We would get together once a week and go over everything that was being done, because it had to advance on, you know, many different fronts. And that permitted me to simply sit down whenever there was a, you know, something was needed and quickly do a sketch. And you know, we managed to you know, we're very proud actually. We actually got ourselves t-shirts, not this one, but we did get ourselves t-shirts. And that eye was something that I decided, I can't quite recall. I decided one day to sit down and draw, because it's a moment in the film and a moment in the book when Smaug's eye opens.
Yes.
And that eye defines, in a sense, the rest of the dragon. So I thought, well, I better sit down and take my time and try and draw something that sums up every emotion I feel about this character, because also, and I'm going to open a quick parenthesis, we were not designing a creature into my mind. We were designing a character who happened to be shaped as a dragon.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's really important. And obviously, you know, there's a lot of people involved, and of course Benedict Cumberbatch, and you know, hundreds of people involved in this dragon. But just trying to find something in Smaug which is an alliance of the traditional dragon and the first dragon in modern literature.
Right.
And then just in terms of like putting this together, I'm thinking adaptation wise, we're reading about a dragon, but you're pulling in anatomical drawings. You're pulling in emotion. I mean, it looks like there's a double lid there. There's a lot happening in this one idea. But when we do see it on screen, we're not thinking about anatomy. You know, all we feel is emotion.
Yeah, I mean, every little snippet of knowledge that you can put in to, I think, any drawing or any sketch is there to help further an idea, or an emotion, or a character, or some character trait. And how do you make a creature like a dragon into a being that humans can actually interact with without anthropomorphizing him? And that was another challenge. So it's, you know, but honestly, all of that, I come up with it later on. You know, I'm not thinking about it when I'm drawing. When I'm drawing, there's nothing happening up here really. It's all simply the. Can I open another parenthesis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please.
There, you know, I used to think that the process of image making was simply getting what we had here onto some kind of a tangible surface, if you like, some kind of concrete form. And it was all in there. We just had to get it out. And I realize now that that's extremely wrong to my mind. What we do possess is the knowledge, the experience, and the desire to find images. But those images they're out in the world. They're out there. They're out there somewhere. And what we have to do is reach out and try and uncover them. But they're definitely not in here.
So it's more about discovery than invention, you would say.
I think it is. I have said it's akin to archaeology, because I'm convinced the images are there. Whether you find them or not is another question.
Right.
And I think that I've often wondered what pushes people to do art, because it's obviously something they need to do. Otherwise, you would not submit yourself to all the difficulties that it entails. And therefore, there's a fundamental imbalance somewhere. But that imbalance, I truly believe, is something that makes you lean towards the world. Doesn't make you lean back into yourself. Doesn't make you fall away from people. It makes you, lean towards them, towards the human experience, towards history, towards art, towards everything that makes us what we are. And to me, that's, a certain responsibility, a burden in some in some cases, but also a source of an enormous source of satisfaction, because it means that you're continually out trying to make contact with things. We often go to museums. Whenever there's a museum on our path, we make an effort to go in, and you can be alone in a museum, but it is literally filled with people, because every object in that museum was made by someone, and all those people are present. The traces of their hands and their minds are present. And to me, that's really moving, because that's what it's all about. It's all about people. Our contact with them, maybe through a book, maybe through a piece of art, maybe through music, a play, a movie, but it's about people.
I feel like that taps into so much of how the Tolkien fandom feels about this. So it's lovely to hear you say it so eloquently.
Yeah.
And in the same thread, we've had a couple of questions. Kirmayertzi asks, "What's the most difficult thing that you've had to draw?" I don't know if any artist would be able to have the answer for that, but I feel the need to ask it.
Some things are. I mean, the most difficult things to draw are the ones that don't give you enough to catch on to get a hold of. The elusive ones are the hardest to draw, and they're ultimately the least satisfying, because you have the impression that you haven't quite gotten close. That can be literally anything. It's not so much a question of the physical appearance of what you're trying to draw. It's more a question of your ability or not to find those points of contact. So there are times when you can do a drawing which academically is satisfying, but emotionally doesn't really do it for you, because you haven't quite found that sensation.
Does it help if you have more text versus less text? I mean, we know with Rings of Power, we're working with less text.
Yeah.
Is that somehow freeing or not relevant?
I wouldn't say it's not relevant. It is. It doesn't matter. I really think that it's, sometimes there's a lot of text, sometimes there's not much. I'm good at ignoring text if I'm afraid if they don't really speak to me. So, any errors I make are ones where I simply haven't been attentive. And I'd like to go back to the fans on this one, because I rely on them a lot, because, I'm certainly not going to go back through all 13 volumes of the history of Middle-earth looking for some detail. But I know full well that on the internet, some fan has, set all that up, and it's all there, and I can just go type in a few keywords and find the information I need. So I'm very grateful to those people for the incredible encyclopedic work that they've done. and it makes life, much less laborious for people like me, because I'm certainly not an expert on Tolkien. I've got a certain familiarity with it, but I'm certainly not an expert.
Thinking about that, coming back to thinking about your process, and you talked about kind of being, not thinking, right, and just sort of drawing and seeing what happens. After that, so do you find that there's sort of an evaluation stage, right? So you draw something and then you look at it and decide whether it's, I mean, you use the dating site metaphor, right? Sort of swiping through the images and saying no, 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 maybe yes, right? So is there a kind of an evaluative process, and how much of that process is about then kind of coming back to the text and saying, okay, I think that's kind of treating what's there? Or
Ooh, I'll have to try that sometime. I honestly don't spend a lot of time dwelling on artwork that's done.
right,
I know I am aware that sometimes I've got something that I do like.
right,
The reasons for which may escape me when at that moment. But I'm more interested in the next drawing. I'm more interested in where I can go further. I mean, there are several types of artwork. Of course, there are sketches, which are really incidental and quickly done. There are drawings which are halfway between a sketch and a painting, because they're a little more, you need to do them a little slower, they need to be a little more finished. And then of course there are full color paintings. But concerning sketches, a sketch is there to ask as many questions as it gives answers. And when it's doing neither of the above, then it's done and you can move on to the next one. That process is something that you have to go through to do a finished drawing, but it's assimilated into the drawing itself. And of course, for a painting, you have a sketch in the beginning, and then you need to be, director, cameraman, lighting expert, all of those things rolled into one to try and do a finished painting.
And in that respect, how much do you get to stay involved in the process? Do they come back to you out to do the 3D grading and the composite at the end and all of that?
It depends entirely on the nature of the production.
Sure.
Some productions, you can be involved from the very beginning right to the time it hits the screens. Others, it's a much more compartmentalized process. It really depends on the structure and on the director.
I'm like, I got one more on that. And then in the same vein, are you involved in costume creation and architectural concept? I mean, every single specific aspect. We know you're involved in architectural, I suppose, but I'm thinking of the costumes of Numenor and the detail that we saw in some of those.
I mean, I love working across the board. Once again, it's each project is very different. And this, the huge difference with Rings of Power compared to other projects I've been on is the length of time and the amount of screen time that needs to be generated. So I've been working now for the better part of 3 years on Rings of Power.
Wow.
Starting with the map of Numenor, working on seasons 1 and 2. So it's been a while. So since I started, and it's still all fresh and new.
Oh, what a gift to not be tired of it after so many years. That's wonderful.
Yeah, is there a life after Tolkien? Is there? Aren't you fed up? This is the question I do get a lot. Aren't you fed up with Middle Earth? Haven't you had enough? Which I suppose is a way of telling me, why don't you do something else for a change? But honestly, there's a good example of that on your board behind you, actually, the Kingdom of Angmar, which was a piece of concept art done for The Hobbit, and the number of times that you're working on a landscape, and you're standing somewhere, obviously, when you're working on it, and you're looking out into the distance, and you're thinking, oh, I wish the script would take us there. And of course, it doesn't always. And that happened to me on any number of occasions. Looking out towards the Blue Mountains, looking out towards Angmar, wondering what's beyond Gundabad. Wishing the script would take us there. We wanted so badly to visit the Withered Heath.
Yes.
Mhm.
One point was one of the things that we were thinking of, and you really regret that. No, you have to stick with the script, and there's a lot to illustrate. But just that to say that even within the scope of The Hobbit, which is which is a book which is quite local in scope,
Yes.
there's so much that we just never touched on. So I have the impression I've personally barely scratched the surface of Middle Earth.
Yes.
Oh, that's lovely to hear.
Yeah, I can say, John, I certainly relate to exactly what you're saying. I've been now, I have several thousand hours of classes out there on and discussions of Tolkien over the years that I've been broadcasting, and people ask me the same thing. Do you ever get to? You're going through the Lord of the Rings again? How many times have you done this? But I have exactly the same experience. That sense of just scratching the surface. There's always so much.
And also one of the enduring attractions of Tolkien, which we thankfully we easily forget between readings, is just the beauty of the language. And it's almost, many parts of it are almost made to be read aloud. I never understood the iambic parameter iambic pentameter in Tom Bombadil's speech.
It's trochaic, but yes, exactly.
Trochaic. Okay, sorry, got it.
No,
of course, I was going to get it wrong.
But yes, no, exactly. And that's such a wonderful example. There's so many people, if you don't read it aloud, you don't realize that all of his dialogue, like everything he says, is in the same meter as his as songs that he sings.
No, it's I mean, the best experience I had reading it aloud was I'd read The Hobbit for my son. I was reading Lord of the Rings for him, and he was still fairly young, but young enough to have 5 or 6 pages a night. And we were getting towards the end, and I was reading away, and I was thinking, right, I've got another 15 or so pages. That's another 2 evenings, and we and they were getting ready to go to the Grey Havens. And I heard I heard sniffling from the bed. My son was laying in the dark. So it was so sad. And I thought, no, I can't leave him like that, until tomorrow night. So we just carried on right to the end. And it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've had reading a text, because it was just filled with emotion. And, and not so much from me, but from from my audience of one.
Right.
And and that's very moving, and it's easy to forget that. And it's also easy to forget that you need to devote the time to reading properly.
Yes.
And because we live in such a high-speed world, it's hard to sit down sometimes and read 20 pages. Or we skim through, and the worst sin we make is that we skim through things because we've read it several times and we think we know it already.
Yes.
But no, you've got to, you've really got to read it as it was meant to be read.
Yeah, could not agree more with that. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I also think it's similar to what you were talking about before we started broadcasting. These fresh eyes. There's a gift that can be brought to having fresh eyes to something you think so well, and being able to experience something for the first time. It's obviously hard to do that for us now, having looked at this so many times, but it's not impossible either. And it's so refreshing to see it through the eyes of your son.
And that is the gift that the although fans are demanding, although they are quite a fascinating crowd, that is the one gift that they do bring, is their view of what you do. And sometimes it's disconcerting, sometimes it's surprising. Most of the times it's comforting, because you have the impression that you've actually touched something important. And but it is very interesting. And I'm always amused and interested and intrigued I've had people tell me, come up to me and tell me, Gollum doesn't look like that.
Right.
I said, okay, and how does he look? Well, I don't know, but not like that.
Mm,
So, but then to be able to say that, you need an image of Gollum to, to compare. So it's it's a very interesting. I've had hundreds and hundreds of fascinating encounters with people who are fans of the books and other authors, other books, but it's clear the Tolkien crowd are perhaps the most passionate.
we talk about that a lot on this show of
Yes.
they can't do that. Well, they can, but
Right.
your frame of reference might be a little different.
Yeah, and you had wanted to thinking about seeing things fresh and everything. Is you had mentioned earlier that you were interested in a comment that Peter Jackson had made recently in The Guardian about that.
Oh yeah, yes, it was a recent article where the journalist was basically commenting on Peter's remark that he would like to get a brief memory wipe in order to be able to see Lord of the Rings without knowing how every millisecond of it was made.
Mm.
Right.
And the journalist told him to snap out of it. But I think that's to misinterpret what Peter was saying. I think it was a wistful remark, and I can certainly relate to the burden that any creative professional carries into any encounter with anything, especially their own work. And I would love to be able to do that, to be able to see my own work without knowing it was me, if you like.
Yeah.
This does not mean that I want to lose my memory entirely, but to have that freshness of approach, to actually be able to see things without all of that luggage.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so thinking about again this sort of process of discovery, and we were talking about sketching and things. Of course, one of the sketches of yours that has received a lot of focus here over the last couple of months has been the famous snow troll or ice troll sketch here for the Rings of Power show. Tell us about that. So again, and what I'm interested in here, we were talking before about, illustrating things where there's a lot of description and illustrating things where there's very little text. Of course, this is one of those filling in the gaps things, right? Where we're not dealing with something that Tolkien described at all. What's your, tell us more about that process. Like when you sketched this and you found this, this guy, sort of unfolding under your pencil as you were sketching. What is it about it that makes you feel, okay, this works. This is right, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I did, I think, about 7 or 8 trolls for that, on pursuing that theme. And they're all quite different. But there's a moment when it's really hard to say. Any sketch is a dialogue with 3 people involved, or 3 entities involved, if you like. One is the theme. So in this case, the mention in the script of a snow troll.
Yeah.
The other one is, of course, the person who's holding the pencil. And the third participant is the drawing itself. Mm-hmm. And this is a true dialogue. So if one is doing all the talking, the other 2 can't get a word in edgeways. It's not a dialogue anymore. So part of the process is aligning the speed of your thinking with the speed of your pencil. So if your thoughts are miles ahead of your drawing, then your hand is struggling to keep up, and you do a very sketchy, not unsatisfying sketch. If your mind is not progressing at the same speed as that drawing, then you tend to spend too much time on details which have no point in having that time spent on them. So that form of equilibrium is already important. And also you need to remain attentive to circumstance, because the pencil can have a mind of its own. And I can really understand writers who say, oh, the character just got away from me and took me, somewhere I never suspected. Pencils do the same thing.
Mm.
And occasionally something will happen in one of those gestures that will open up a whole new avenue of exploration, a whole new idea. And you'll make a U-turn in the middle of a drawing and pursue that because suddenly the idea has evolved. So that back and forth is really important.
Mhm.
And I think there was probably a more efficient, harmonious back and forth for that drawing than for the other trolls I did. Though I do have a really creepy one that I really liked.
Ooh.
But maybe one day.
One of the questions in the chat was actually about a drawing that you loved that didn't get used. So hopefully one day.
Any film project, that's all we do are drawings that don't get used.
Right.
I think that the amount of artwork generated by an art department for a project like this is absolutely enormous, and that artwork is part of a process. You can't. You've got to start with something. So with the script, with the description from the showrunners, with the thoughts of the art director, you need to produce imagery. From that imagery, a discussion can take place, and then it can go somewhere. Yeah. Occasionally, it goes right to from A to B in one drawing. Sometimes it's a process that takes, literally dozens and dozens of drawings and paintings. Sometimes something can be taken all the way to, as far as it can possibly go before being abandoned.
Mm.
Smaug, for example, for in The Hobbit, I initially drew him with 4 legs, very much like Tolkien's drawing in Tolkien's own drawing. And 6 months before the film came out, Peter said, I think he'd be cool if he only had 2 back legs and his arms were his wings. So we redesigned Smaug. You can't just cut off, that extra pair of legs. And but that's all a process.
Right.
And I think that the key to surviving in this world where those, none of these drawings are important in themselves. They are part of a path, if you like. And the key to surviving in that world is that every time you've put a huge amount of work into something, which is subsequently ignored for any number of good reasons, or you're simply asked to redo something that you thought you'd done particularly well depicting, you need to accept it as a challenge and a new opportunity. And you think, right, here we go again. This time I can do better than I did. And if you maintain that attitude, then it's literally purely pleasure, because nothing is ever wasted, nothing is ever lost. You're building on what you've done, even if it's not used.
Such a healthy attitude.
I honestly think it's that's how any collaborative process needs to be like that. I mean, it's not always easy to do, because many artists, we're used to working alone. We're basically all little monks in our little cells, all by ourselves, struggling with our little paintings and our own little universes. But then suddenly you're in the middle of a team of several hundred people. You need to open up, and you need to relax, and you need to simply say that, right, this is it. This is an important operation, and you need to have that that positive energy. I think is absolutely crucial.
I think you've just answered my question, but Ravenwolf in the chat asked about how you keep up with the production demands, because this is such a long shoot, as have been the past projects you've worked on, and the physical side of it, just the amount of drawings and the holding of a pencil, and how you don't have permanent carpal tunnel and things like that.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about drawing in general. Unfortunately, not quite as true with the computers, because we do have to sit in front of them quite a lot, far too much for my taste. But generally, I tend to work in one of these, and I have a very comfortable chair in which I can sit, or I can, go anywhere I want to work, actually. And all you simply do is relax and empty your mind and concentrate on the theme and see what happens. So it's not exactly a difficult job in that sense. Sometimes it can be very difficult finding the right idea, of course, but you know, it's not a hard, I shouldn't say it's not a hard job, because then they'll try and lower my salary, but having too much fun. But it is a job that gives you a huge amount of satisfaction if you do get something that you feel is really corresponds to how you saw it.
Beautiful.
And it's also, you know, it's a portion of the process in which you're involved when you're doing your own artwork, your own finished paintings. Yeah. It's been a while since I've done a painting. I realize I'm looking at the other side of the studio, which is probably under a layer of dust right now, and I can see an easel with a painting that's been sitting on it for literally months that I haven't had time to get back to. So I am looking forward to getting away from this machine here and the sketchbook and getting back to actual painting for a bit.
Oh, lovely.
Right. So
I'll do that in my spare time.
Good. So I want to run something by you. This is just a sort of a Tolkien theory of mine, but I thought that you would be a good person to ask about it. 'Cause I was teaching. I taught a series of little online discussions on the history of Middle Earth, specifically the history of the Lord of the Rings, looking at his manuscript process. And Christopher Tolkien did such a brilliant job of kind of walking us through his thought process going through. And as I was kind of teaching my way through those books, I sort of found myself arriving at this theory about Tolkien and about how his own creative mind was working, thinking about Tolkien's own process in the ways that you've been describing your process. And I got the conviction that Tolkien, when he was imagining, especially when he was imagining places, that he was primarily thinking first and foremost as a visual artist. He would sort of start with the pictures in his head, and then and sometimes I think you can see this when he actually is doing sketches in the margins, right, of some of his manuscripts, like his famous Orthanc sketches and stuff, as he's describing. And the impression that I got, it would take a whole book to write, for me to write I'd have to write a whole book to try to back it up or prove it. But my theory was that for Tolkien, he was, I think, even in some ways, first and foremost, a painter, a visual artist. That seemed to me the way that was always his first contact with this world that he was imagining, and then the words were kind of his way to try to capture in words, some of those things. Have you gotten anything like that impression with Tolkien? I mean, just as somebody who is a visual artist yourself and working with and going through that similar kind of process with Tolkien, does that make sense to you? Do you think that's not so?
Well, that seems to me to be absolutely clear, is that he is painting with words. That's all he does.
Right.
That's why his work is so visually rich for people like me, is that his words are nothing but the resume of what you're seeing when you read them.
Right.
And he's one of those authors, and there are a number whose work simply calls out to be illustrated. It draws the images out of you. That's how powerful it is. There are many authors that I can read with a lot of enthusiasm where I don't see images at all, and those authors are more self-contained. What it is exactly about Tolkien and his capacity to evoke not only emotions but the images that accompany them, I couldn't really say, but I totally agree. I think he's writing paintings, basically, is what he's doing.
Right. Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah. Okay.
We've got 2 minutes left. So is there anything else? I know, right? This is the problem, John. We have too much.
Really fast.
It
My
was.
goodness.
You want to stay for another 3 hours? We're good at that.
Yeah, we could do this all night. Yeah, no, it's, I mean, there's a lot to say, you know, and I think, I mean, I honestly do believe that artists should all be under restraining orders and not allowed to talk about their own work.
Why?
But nonetheless, I think there are a lot of important questions that are raised by the simple creation of imagery and the place that it can, you know, the space that it can occupy simply by existing.
Yeah.
And you know, and I'm a huge fan of many turn of the century, late 19th century, early 20th century illustrators and artists, and who enrich me considerably just by, you know, just by looking at their work. And I think that our capacity to actually read and appreciate imagery is really important, and to understand imagery, why it works, why it doesn't, to have a, you know, some kind of a grasp of the, you know, of the simple narrative, visual narrative in any painting, of the internal logic of the extended narrative, what happens before the painting depicts a scene, what's going to happen after. All of that is really important. All of those are ingredients in this sort of soup that is either edible and very tasty, or just no good at all. So there's an awful lot that goes into all of this, and that may sound like I spend all my time, you know, like Rodin's thinker, like mulling over all this. But please be reassured, it is entirely after the fact. When I'm drawing and painting, I'm not thinking at all. I'm trying to maintain this contact with the theme that I'm trying to explore, whether it's a text, whether it's a script, whether it's a description, whether it's my own work or someone else's, it doesn't matter. And quite often another person's work is even more attractive than your own because it's new. And, you know, all of those things, I think, mean that you're given this opportunity to establish points of contact within that theme, and through that theme to establish points of contact with other people. And if you manage to establish enough, then, you know, you get that return on your work, if you like.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Awesome. Did that make any sense?
Yes, you're so eloquent, John. I could listen to you all day.
No, this is wonderful. And I said, this is exactly the conversation we've been so excited to have. And, you know, we hope to have you back again later on. We can maybe talk a little bit more specifically about some of the visual elements of the Rings of Power. Maybe even after the first season is going, as you say, so we can watch it through to the end. And then
absolutely no spoilers. No spoilers.
Exactly. But yeah, no. So we hope to have you back to do a more a sort of in-depth discussion of this project in particular. But it's been so good being able to have this more free-ranging discussion about the artistic process and the adaptation process in general. It's been fascinating. Thank you. You've been very generous with your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, John.
Right. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Talk again soon.
Oh, brilliant.
Wonderful. Okay.
I'm off air.
No, I think you have to physically leave if you want us off air.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we're not broadcasting anymore.
We just continue on. So.
Right. We're talking for a while.
So yeah, feel free to leave.
Well, enjoy.
But
enjoy
you're very welcome
yourself.
to stay, obviously, if you'd like.
Thanks again for having me. And
very good.
Thanks,
and
John.
Until next time. Okay. Bye-bye.
Right. Thank you. Man, there's a lot to think about that.
I know.
A very great deal.
There's so many things that I was just so grateful to listen to him speak, because the way that he described words to visuals, I just feel like it just fits so well with. I mean, I think we know this because this is kind of our field, but he knows this because this is what he does. And it was just very reaffirming to hear him say Tolkien is a painter. He just uses words as the medium. Yeah. And it's so, and again, I was coming back to one of the points I was emphasizing. I think there are a whole bunch of Tolkien readers who would be shocked to hear him say Tolkien doesn't describe things that much. Right. Right. But he's absolutely right. Yeah. You know, again, Tolkien tries to capture, he spends a lot of words talking about things. Right.
But what he's not doing is a kind of like you imagine. I think, for instance, we have many of our we have a bunch of people in our community who are blind. And so sometimes when I'm looking, for instance, they'll be attending one of my Lotro streams or something. And so I'll be describing what's on screen because I know that they can't see it. And so I'll be trying to like just convey in words exactly what I'm seeing, right?
Yeah.
And exactly what's happening. That's the kind of description Tolkien doesn't do.
No.
Right? He doesn't tell us, okay,
Factual.
it was this color and here's how the lighting was and he was this tall and this was his hair color and that's the kind of thing that he doesn't do. Instead, again, we get the perky chap with the bright eye, right? We get and I think of his landscape descriptions talking about trees, and he'll sometimes mention like the species of trees that are there, but he will just as often he'll give us this like long metaphor to describe how like the trees in the valley were like the masts of ships. He'll give this extended simile, or he'll get into this metaphor or multiple metaphors to try to capture, as John was saying, like the emotion, like the feeling of that, like what it was like to be Frodo looking down into that valley rather than.
But that's what's so powerful, I think, for us about Tolkien's text is that, yes, you're looking at a landscape, but you're taking in all of the history of the person having that visual experience.
Yes.
They understand what ships are, what harbor did they see them in,
Right.
all this stuff is feeding into their own interpretation of what they're looking at. And so is your own.
Yeah.
I keep hitting my mic. I talk with my hands a lot more than I thought. But so is your own. So when he was talking about that dialogue between three people when making an image, it's no different in my mind from a viewer watching a film and a filmmaker creating that film from a text. You're having this dialogue between the people, which in and of itself explains why some people are so angry because they're not having a conversation.
Right.
They're having a very one-sided, I'm not listening to you, I'm not listening to you, I'm not listening to you, I'm just getting mad because it's not what I'm picturing.
Yes.
Yeah, it was just such a beautiful image to.
And we've talked about some of this before, but I wanted to. I've been itching to kind of theorize a little bit, to get a little abstract, because so much of what John was talking about was kind of making me think this way. But of course I didn't want to, and I
felt like I needed a dry erase board while I was talking.
I know.
Like, yep, keep going.
I kept switching to like make notes and stuff.
And I was trying to read your questions, so I'm sorry that I didn't bring up as many as you guys were saying, but I was like, I can't not listen to this.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. Okay.
Right, so theorize. And then we'll take a look at questions.
Because when he was talking about, when he was trying to get at both how he arrives at an image, I mean that image of the trialogue technically, right, between the theme, like the concept,
the words on the script,
the pencil,
not even the book, the words on the script,
right, and the pencil and his mind, right, and
or himself, because he said it wasn't in his brain.
Right, not his brain, right, exactly. But okay, and then when he was talking about connecting with people, right, okay, so. All right, theorizing, and I'm theorizing off the cuff, which is like.
I feel like you're gonna make my brain hurt. I'm ready.
Okay. So the question is, what is the matter? Right. You've got the book. You've got the words on the in the text, right? But of course, the words in the text are just trying to capture something, right? And Tolkien himself talked about how what he was capturing was not what was in his brain. He spoke Tolkien, and I mean, I was really struck by. I don't know how much time John Howe has spent like reading Tolkien's letters and Tolkien talking about his like how much time he spent in the history of Middle Earth, for instance, looking at Tolkien's draft histories and stuff like that. But I was really struck by how similar emptying the mind, right? The process of discovery rather than invention. Tolkien was all about that. He was constantly speaking like he was listening to characters talk. The jokes that he would make to Christopher about like how if Faramir doesn't stop talking soon, he's going to have to be moved to the appendices. And how he met this charming Gondorian captain, but he just keeps talking, and I don't know, Anyway, so like again that act of discovery. So again, my overall theoretical question, right, is sort of like, what is the Lord of the Rings? What is the story? What is the thing, right? The heart, the essence of the thing. in a sense, of course, the books are all we have, right? And that's a restraint that we operate under. And yet, that's not the thing, because Tolkien wouldn't have said it was the thing, right? It was the medium through which he was trying to capture the thing.
I mean, this feels like it's bordering on a theological conversation,
Well,
because
yes,
it's really comparable, right?
It is really comparable. And then, of course, when we were thinking about Tolkien as visual artist, that there's a sense in which Tolkien's words are actually 2 steps removed from the thing, capital T, right? Because there are times when he's not just trying to capture that thing in his words, he's trying to capture his mental picture of the thing in his words
and structure it. So he sees the thing, but he's also trying to deliver what he sees in some sort of a structured, understandable order.
Right.
And in that editing process, what else is lost or changed or interpreted differently?
Right. And so to go back to what John was saying in his pictures, remember he was talking about connecting with people.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it's all about, is connecting with people. So in a sense, the painting, like the drawing, John Howe's drawing itself, is also not the thing. Right? That the thing is like,
it's the conduit.
Right. It's the drawing is the conduit.
Yeah.
Connecting him with the person. So the person is looking at the drawing and they're imagining and experiencing a thing, right? And he, in his it's sort of in his process, and over the course of, he's sort of experiencing this thing too, and it's kind of coming out through him, right? But it's not his invention, right? He himself is also, it's a thing that's kind of coming through him. And that same process is happening with Tolkien, right? So it just, all of these things, I think of all this stuff in connection with the basic adaptation question that we've been asking since episode 1. What does it mean for an adaptation to be true to the source text?
Yeah, I mean, that brings us right back to the language situation. And as you were saying that, I couldn't help but think about something really basic that we're all familiar with: news broadcasters.
Right.
If they all are reporting on the same story, think of all the news outlets, from the Sun to the Guardian, sorry, those are both UK examples, but far right to far left, tabloid to traditional, Fox News to NBC to CNN, like all these different perspectives of the same event are completely different. And that is down to interpretation and projecting to a recipient. That's what this is.
Yeah.
We're all, John Howe is looking at something that theoretically we could all have the same look at.
Yes.
But he's giving us the conduit.
Yes.
To interpret it.
And this then, coming back to the theory here, when we're reading the text, there's another thing involved, right? That is the thing that our imagination is doing. Because, of course, when we read a book, we're not actually experiencing Tolkien's book. Like, the book is a conduit between us and Tolkien, but it's not a hard line to his brain or his imagination.
And I think we did talk about this before. It's also really different where, if somebody says, I always use Harry Potter, but the Daily Prophet,
right?
I'm picturing what that newspaper looks like and how it's laid out. If I only see the film, that's somebody else's vision in my brain. So you're losing that imaginative element.
Right. But that's it's inescapable. Like, so when people talk about, I only care about what's in the book. No, you don't.
Yeah.
You don't. That's not even possible. Like, that's not how reading works.
And that's clearly not how Tolkien works.
No.
And I loved hearing John Howe affirm that, saying he is a painter.
Yeah.
But he uses words.
Yeah. Exactly. So we have to be thinking about, so there's that thing that's kind of coming through John Howe's drawings, right? And there's the thing that Tolkien was trying to convey through his images and words about images.
Yep.
And there's that thing that we have in our own minds when we read. None of those things are exactly the same, but there is a kind of
conversation.
Conversation. I was going to say, and this is a strange metaphor, maybe I was going to say community, like they exist in a kind of community.
No, I think that's fair, because it also grows like a community. I mean, when you think about when he started doing these images, and what did he say, the 70s, and becoming the persistent HarperCollins door knocker?
Correspondent.
Yeah. I mean, you think the 70s, there wasn't much for him to go on to help him form this world.
Yeah.
30, 40, 50 years on, we have a lot more to build this community. You know, we
Yes.
went from a tiny village to a major metropolitan area in terms of influence
Yeah.
and voices and platforms. You know, there's so many different ways that people engage with Tolkien now that it has to grow. It has to remain a changing conversation.
Yeah. And so that idea that, and again, I still haven't figured out how to convey this in a way that doesn't sound like when people have, as so many people do, and I can't blame them, like, you know, it's only a small subset of us that spend a lot of time doing literary theory, right? Like you can be excused from not doing literary theory, but anyway, so when you have a kind of a simplistic idea, like a simple idea, I won't say simplistic because that sounds insulting, and I don't mean to be insulting at all. When you have a simple idea of a book and reading the book, right? And you have this idea that like the book in your head, right? The story that's in your head is the book, right? That is like what Tolkien wrote. Like, so you've got what Tolkien wrote in your head, right? And but you don't really, like that's not possible. I mean, you can memorize the text,
sure,
but if you're using your own imagination at all, and you can't not, right? But if you're using and the extent to which you're using your own imagination, which everybody does, and the better the book is, the more you're doing that, right? Then the product that emerges is it's a different thing. It's a separate thing, and it's therefore different for every person. This I began thinking about this in my teaching many years ago. I had a very wise colleague who said, because I'm trained as a medievalist and taught medieval literature for many years, and one of the things that really annoys a Chaucerian is people saying that Chaucer is boring. And I'm like, holy cow! First of all, like, how can anyone say that Chaucer is boring? Like, Chaucer is like outrageous, satirical, hilarious. Like, you can find him not funny. Like, it might not appeal to you, but to say like, oh, he's just dull would be like, it would be like saying, well, Robin Williams was a very dull conversationalist, right? Like, it's like you might not like him, but you can't say that. Like, that's just ridiculous. And so, so a Chaucerian be like, Chaucer isn't boring. What my very wise colleague said was, no, the Chaucer that is in the head of that person is boring. Like, that person has a boring Chaucer and it means that, what it means is they haven't gotten it, right? Like they're not seeing.
Yes, because that's the other thing I would say is that you could also say they're bored by Chaucer.
Yes.
Because they're not having that dialogue.
Right.
They're reading the words.
Right.
And they're not
there's, whether it's some level of, comprehension or context or whatever that they're lacking, the richness of, humor and everything that's there in Chaucer, it's not there. Like, the Chaucer in their head is not there. Right. And at the end of the day, the Chaucer in their head is what matters. And so I began thinking about that more and more as a teacher, and my challenge began to be like, so how do I, as a teacher, help to introduce people to like the Chaucer that I know?
The Chaucer that's in your head.
Yeah, the Chaucer in my, how can I share that with people? But not just to be like, here's what I think about Chaucer, right? But to help them have an encounter with Chaucer. So like, I would sort of think, of myself as a teacher, as like not a tour guide, like a person who introduces people to other people, like a party host,
like a matching app. It's like a dating app. That was such a great, that's such a great metaphor for that.
Yeah, where I would be like, being like, students, Chaucer, students, right? And like, let's see if we can get to know each other a little bit, and you can
lead a horse to water and all that,
right?
But I mean, I think you can take it away from Chaucer and do the same thing here, because like many people, I'm sure the Silmarillion is not everybody's favorite, and Silmarillion was not my favorite until I started engaging with some of the things that you talk about and other ways to engage with the text that made it more real, and you understood the depth, and then you do get an appreciation. But it took a while. I didn't like it at 19 when I was required to read it for a class.
And so when you come back to, again, the people's readings and their reactions, and that the lack of self-awareness about that, right? So people who just make unequivocal statements, right? Things like the Silmarillion is boring.
Right.
Right. And again, like in the Silmarillion in their minds is really, really boring. If I could somehow, get some kind of brain to brain direct connection, if I could do the Elvish telepathy thing,
Right.
and just they could open their minds to me and I could see what they
Mind
see in
meld,
their
yeah.
minds. Yeah. Then I don't know what I would see. Maybe what I'd be seeing is just like a list of hard to pronounce names
Mhm.
and, a bunch of descriptions of the boundaries of kingdoms. And
Right.
yeah, that's pretty boring.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. It's one guess at like the, what the boring Silmarillion looks like. Right.
You're like,
So
what is that?
But anyway, the problem is when people the problem is not so much with the people who find it boring and reject Tolkien entirely. The problem is with the people who love Tolkien and don't realize that the Tolkien that they love, right, the story that they love, isn't Tolkien. Like, it's not the words in Tolkien's
Right.
book. It's the book in their minds, and that they are involved in a process of adaptation. Everybody is involved in a process of imaginative adaptation when you're reading. That's an inescapable part, and indeed, of course, one of the most rewarding parts of the reading experience. And so thinking about that and the way it just, again, the parallels between how John was talking about his process and what I've seen in Tolkien's process, and thinking about reading in these ways, and the ways in which there's this sense of, as you say, it does get kind of mystical or theological, right? There's almost this sense that like, okay, the thing, capital T, right? Like the story itself, what it is that what Tolkien was grasping at, what John Howe is trying to do through his drawings, what we are experiencing through our readings. It's like that thing exists out there, right? Independent even of Tolkien
But
himself.
no one can
right?
define it in one way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Nobody can define. Even Tolkien's own book
Yeah.
is an attempt, which he would be the first one to say is an inadequate attempt.
And he changed
capture.
his mind or
Yeah.
misinterpreted, or however you
Yeah.
want to phrase it, multiple times. I can't remember the exact thing now. I'll have to watch the recording, but John Howe did it. He contradicted himself from the beginning of that hour to the end of that hour. And now, of course, I'm forgetting the instance, but I'm like,
Right.
we all do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Creative people and interpretation, it adjusts and adapts.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So no, it's
And there's so many different factors to it. So now I'm on going off. There's so many different factors to it too. I mean, we're talking about creative process and feeling the story and representing that in a visual medium. If you want to talk practical side of it, when you're bringing in budget, location, filming timing restrictions, studio access,
Right.
So many different things that can affect that interpretation. It makes it almost easier for people to nitpick and say, oh, well, that's not how it is. Well, they had 2 hours to churn something out.
Right.
Or Amazon, they have a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of resources. And what did he say? 80 people or something on his development team?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the practical comparisons to the artistic process, they all have to be taken into account, I think, when
and
contemplating
even when
adaptation.
even when you think about other even more basic forms of limitation, like pencil and paper, like the flatness of paper,
Yeah.
right, and the monochrome nature of your pencil,
Mhm.
right? I mean, these are all limitations that you can get around. I mean, I still have it up here, like looking at his the snow troll here,
Yeah.
right? That you can see the ways in which, as the wonderful artist that he is overcoming the restrictions of the flatness of the paper and the monochrome pencil and things, right?
Mhm.
Great artists do that, right? But great artists can overcome even we've got 2 hours and we've got to make it happen, and no, we can't do it that way. I know this is how you picture it in your head, but for practical filming purposes, we can't represent that. We can't do it that way. It's got to be somewhere else, some other way. That's what artists do.
And hearing his attitude when he said, you take that as a challenge, when they removed 2 legs off Smaug, and it wasn't wrong how it was before. It was, here's a new way to interpret that character, and isn't this a great opportunity? I mean, what a lovely perspective to have for a job that could otherwise be so frustrating.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So no, it's fascinating to think about. Anyway, so that was the theorizing that I was wanting to do.
That was fun.
And I think it's
I'm getting on board with that.
It's so helpful to think about, and I really wish, as I say, I'm still searching for ways to talk about this more effectively with hostile people. That is, with people who feel, because it's so easy to feel, if you're not kind of, again, sort of self-aware about the process of reading and the involvement of your imagination and stuff, then it simply feels like an attack, right? I mean, because you're convinced the pictures you have in your head, right, that this is Tolkien, right, and you know this is straight from the book, and it is, and there's a sense in which that's true, right? I'm not denying that. I'm not saying they're incorrect or wrong or anything like that. I'm just saying it's actually the picture in your mind, even the memory of the text, right? Even when you're recalling what the text says, there is a sense in which, and again, nobody likes to, people's eyes glaze when English professors talk like this, but there's a sense in which the text itself it doesn't really exist. Like it's not, and I don't say that, I used to, so confession, when I was in college and even in grad school, I hated it when death of the author stuff. I hated talking about death of the author stuff. And what I felt myself was the desire to, because I felt it was a degradation of the text, right? I felt it was a demeaning of the text, right? To be like, well, basically that the conclusion was, so the text doesn't matter. We can, not quite chuck it out, but whatever, we can kind of patronize it, right? Because what really matters is like our own responses or whatever. But this is not that at all, right? This is not at all about that. It's not about marginalizing the text, saying that what Tolkien wrote doesn't matter. It's just of recognizing that what Tolkien wrote was not the end, but the means to the end, right? It was, as you said, the conduit through which Tolkien was trying to connect with us as readers.
And on that one small thing, I just don't think we can take it out of context of the bigger process. I think if he wrote The Lord of the Rings 30 years later in his life, we would have a very different story.
Yes.
So we're getting a snippet. And like you're saying about the angry discussions, the people that we find it very hard to have those conversations with, if they're not having that conversation, the trialogue,
right,
it's really hard for us to have a dialogue.
Yes.
Yeah.
If it's, so long as you believe that you have this, and this is, I guess, at the end of the day, this is where I think the problem of purism lies, is that there's no such thing as a pure.
But they think there is.
Exactly.
So and then they get very defensive because you're telling them that's not a real thing.
Yeah, and again, and so it sounds like an attack, right? It sounds like saying, like, that you think you know Tolkien, but you don't know Tolkien. Like that's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
We know it differently, and I prefer to come at from this direction. But also, I was an angry fan when I was like 16.
Me too.
There's an arc to
Absolutely.
engagement.
No, I was absolutely an angry fan.
And I could absolutely tap into that energy again if something came up for something that I dearly love and haven't gone through this process for.
I mean, everyone will notice how I did not at all yell at John about Balrog wings. I mean, look, check it out, people. Right? Like John Howe is conspicuously guilty on the Balrog wing front. Hang on a second. I'm queuing up queuing up some of his images.
I was immediately curious though if you were like, oh, are his hobbit feet hurt?
Oh yeah, man. I was gonna talk about that, but we didn't have time to talk about that. We'll come back to the hobbit feet when we get him back up. Here we go. Look at this. Look at these winged Balrogs all over the place, right? I'm not yelling at him about that.
They're pretty substantial.
Yeah.
Also Mohawks.
Yeah. Mohawks too.
Definitely looks like an AC/DC cover.
This kind of does. This is a very metal Tolkien illustration.
Iron Maiden, circa.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. But anyway, so like again, it's not about. And again, had I been in the same place that I was, 25 years ago, it'd be a different conversation. I'd have been coming at him about that because that's wrong, right? But yeah. So what's changed is my own understanding, not just of the text, but of how text works. And again, the more I've come to realize, like John was talking about, like what matters is the two people connecting. Yeah. Right. Not just two, but like people connecting, and the way in which art is designed to be, whether it's visual art, whether it's literary art, there is a way in which it does connect people and bring people into the community of connection to that thing, whatever that thing is.
But
you
that's
know, the
also
capital
what
T
can be
thing.
so difficult. You know, when he was talking about the museum, going by yourself, but feeling like you're in a room of hundreds of people because you have, you know, the person that made the canvas, the person that made the frame, the person that made the paintbrushes, that mixed the paint, the painter, the guy that hung the, you know, all those things combined. It's a very broad community, but it never feels like that when you're reading a book. It is a single relationship between me and the text, and it's private, and it's usually in, you know, a quiet room, and I create the imagery. So it doesn't feel like a community. So as soon as it's opened up and other people's interpretations are allowed to enter, you get very protective and defensive.
Because there's almost like an invasion of privacy.
And there's a forced conversation.
Yes.
I didn't want to have a conversation.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And that's sometimes the feeling that I think people get with adaptation.
And this, I think, is one of the things that fuels that passionate, that sense of like, they're going to ruin Tolkien.
Yeah.
Right. Like somebody is coming into my, wherever you read, right? It's, you know,
Your space.
Coming into my space.
Yeah.
And is going to take Tolkien from me.
Yeah.
Right. Is going to ruin Tolkien for others. Right. And I get that. I
get the feeling totally.
You're right. That sense of privacy. And you think back especially to books that you read as a kid, you know, books that have been your companion for as long as you can remember practically in life. And it's so intimate. It's so intimate. And it really is like friends. I mean, we've all had that experience, right? Of
and
like
formative. You know, I mean, there are some books that make us who we are. So if you're then having somebody coming in and show you, you know, I understand the reaction very strongly, but I do think it takes a certain space and person and openness, which can only come with thinking about this or spending time with different things, that you can kind of take that step back. It does almost become like a meditative practice. Like, I know I talk a lot about film making and the practical side of it, but so much of it is still this kind of open-mindedness, coming to a piece of art and being willing to receive.
Yeah.
And that's where it becomes theological again. What is so freely given?
Right. Yeah. And of course, I know there's, you know, people are wanting to kind of push back against this, which I totally understand. Because let me come back around and say, none of the things that I'm saying right now mean that I think that any possible like adaptation is equally good, or that there's no such thing as something being more or less true to the original,
or good or bad. There are definitely bad adaptations, but I think they're bad adaptations. Somebody might think they're great.
Yes, maybe. Yeah. So I don't mean it all to say that like, the upshot of all of this theorizing is definitely not, therefore, turn off your critical faculty, right? And just because everything is, you know, everything's like equally fine and you should be able to connect with everything, and like Tolkien is everything and everything is Tolkien. Like, that's not the point, really. What I would say is just that it's much messier. It's not simple. It's certainly not, and that's the biggest problem, I think, with purism, is that at the end of the day, it's a simplistic way of approaching not just adaptation, but the book itself. Yeah. And it's more complicated than that. I do think there are ways in which we, you know, I do think it's possible to take two adaptations and say, I do think that this one is closer to the spirit of the book, that this is truer in a sense to what the author seems to be doing in this book than that other adaptation is. Like, I absolutely do think that you can say those things. And so again, I'm not at all suggesting that that kind of critical judgment isn't possible. What I am saying is, slow way the heck down. Yeah. Like, because it's so much more complicated than you think it is. And it's important for us to, it's not that like we all have to theorize like this all the time, but it's just not that simple. We have to acknowledge that it is really complicated. And this is where, although we don't necessarily, you don't have to say, oh, I don't think, just embrace relativism blindly, right? That's not the point. But the point is, you can agree to disagree with people. Yeah. Because, and that's okay. Like, you don't have to, if somebody else does have a very different picture of Tolkien in their mind, if you have a difference with somebody else about what you think is okay or not okay, in, you know, sort of level of you know, fidelity in an adaptation, you're not right and they're wrong.
Right.
You have different perspectives, and and just remember that you're not just sipping from the pure well of Tolkien's brain when
And
you're reading the book.
Lordy, that's the difference, isn't it? You know, when somebody is trying to prove that you are wrong and you are horrible and you clearly can't believe, but
Yeah.
hang on. Yeah, slow down. Because I also liked what John said of course you can just enjoy a simple adaptation. It doesn't always have to have this
Right.
level of engagement and theorizing. I can read a book that is just the words on the page and enjoy it. And I can just watch a film and just enjoy it. But isn't it fun when we get to dig into something like this that does have more depth, that does have a wider community and
Yeah.
a bigger imagery around it? But that also means more interpretations and
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
butting of heads, because people do see it differently and maybe haven't theorized or thought about the different ways that they could engage with it, or someone else could engage with it.
Absolutely.
Too stuck in their own mindset to open up the door to say, oh, you see it that way? Interesting.
Right.
You know, that's not usually the reaction you get. You see it that way? You're wrong.
You're wrong. Exactly. And again, that
Yeah.
doesn't mean that you have to then turn and embrace the way the other person sees
No,
it.
no.
You don't.
And
It's-
again, I'm
yeah.
thinking about like conversations about politics. Like,
Right.
I have no interest in debating politics with anyone. I have lots of interest in discussing them, because then it becomes a dialogue
Right.
where
Then you
if
can learn things.
right,
Yeah.
I'm going to be open to that perspective and say, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way, or oh, I really don't think of it that way. But you know,
Yeah.
to each their own.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, Christian Thompson asked an interesting question. Where do you draw the line? When does an adaptation stray from the source to the point of its existence as an adaptation being questioned? This basically comes down to the question of how do you define the word adaptation,
Mhm.
right? And I hear a lot of people, you know, I get people on Twitter saying things like, you know, if it doesn't do X, Y, and Z, it's not an adaptation of Tolkien anymore. And I think that this is what people are getting at when they are slightingly using the word fan fiction to describe the Rings of Power, which again, I think is a ridiculous thing to say. Just I think it's a ridiculous,
As if it's a bad thing.
right?
Yeah.
Understanding like the use of fan fiction as an insult is, but that seems to me what they're getting at here, right? That like adaptation requires a certain level
of
like,
fidelity.
as you know, Christian says, there's some line somewhere, right, where if you cross that line, and I don't know. I mean, Christian, I would say so. Let me give one example: How to Train Your Dragon.
Love it.
Right. Do you know the books?
No.
You know the books, just
love the films, and I
Okay.
know they're very different than the books.
Well, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Right. So
Oh, sorry.
the film names of characters are the same, mostly. The setting is similar. Some of the basic concept that is like Vikings with dragons is from the book, right? But the plot, events, characters are just, there's not even an attempt. This is not a, we changed some stuff. It's a, we told a completely different story.
But using the same character names.
Using the same character names in a
that's
similar
risky.
setting. And so, I mean, that's, so Christian, for me, like, it's hard for me to consider How to Train Your Dragon movie as an adaptation of the book.
That's tough.
Because it's not, but again, that in some ways it's a simple example.
It's not telling that story.
Right, because exactly what's gone is the story. Like the story is not the same story.
But if you had said that they had changed all the characters' names and stuff, my first question would have been, well, could it exist in the same world?
Right.
Because that's acceptable.
Yeah, in a sense, something which is like the inverse of How to Train Your Dragon. Like, had they been telling the same story, but with very different characters in a very different setting, that would actually feel to me more like an adaptation than the the actual How to Train Your Dragon movie does. But and I mean, I shouldn't talk too much about this because I've only seen the movie once and I've only read the books once, which means I barely know either one of them. So I have no expertise on this, on that particular one. But that one was so striking to me when I found myself so mystified.
Well, and
watching
that's kind of what we were talking about with like close and loose adaptations, right? So like, I might have said it in the previous episode, but the example I always use is Twilight, because of course I did a load of work on that one. But one of the first adaptations of Twilight, Bella Swan, the lead girl, was a track star at Brigham Young University. She's a klutz in the book, so what?
Yeah.
And Edward was a normal human on the run from the FBI. No mention of vampires, no mention of any of that stuff. Why even call it Twilight and use Bella and Edward? Because that's not at all an adaptation.
And this is, of course, exactly the language that I hear people saying.
Yes.
Why are they even using Tolkien if it's so loosely? Yeah.
And it's that kind of conversation I think would be really interesting to have with the showrunners, because I think it could be tough to navigate, but not in an emotive way, more in like a theorizing practical way of like, I want to talk about all these things and I'm not sure how to tie it all together, but I feel like they navigated it. I can't tell until I see it, but everything that we've been talking about, I feel like they're aware of.
Yeah.
So yes, I would consider it an adaptation because they know the world that Tolkien created, and we're trying to bring that spirit. People also struggle with that word of what that means onto a visual interpretation.
Yeah. No, there's much more to talk about. One of the things I look forward to doing is continuing this show when we don't have like super urgent Rings of Power stuff to talk about.
So much is out right now.
Yeah. It'll be nice to just kind of be able to sit down with some of this stuff and look at some examples and on everything. But
and also the break between seasons. That will be nice to kind of.
It will be nice.
We're going to be reactive while this show is coming out, but it ends in October sometime, right?
October. Yeah. Well, season 1 does. But yes, I am hoping, by the way, to get the Rings of Power showrunners, J.D. Payne and Patrick Kay, on this show. And I will hope to put some of this theorizing to them.
We're gonna have to make some notes first. I need bullet points to keep my brain straight. But
I would love to have this to see their line of thinking about this kind of stuff. But we only have about 20 minutes left, so we should talk some, I think, about what is coming, because
we need to cover a few bases.
We do. There's a lot happening here, including, so let's start with a simple thing. I don't
know what order he's going in,
so it's probably not even that simple. Simplest thing, I think we're not going to be able to do the show next week because we're going to be traveling home from New York.
Correct.
Next week, because next week on Tuesday, we are both going to be at the New York City premiere for the Rings of Power. We're going to be seeing the first 2 episodes,
and a panel with showrunners,
with the showrunners and some folks afterwards. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So we'll be freshly not able to talk about the first 2 episodes of the season,
but we will be together again, and we will have a recording of reactions and immediate things that we can build into this loveliness behind us.
Yes, exactly.
We should talk about that too.
Exactly. That's the less simple thing. So we're going to be in New York next Tuesday for the big New York premiere event. But traveling home from that means we're not going to be able to do our normal Wednesday time next week. So we won't be broadcasting next week. But we are doing other big things that are happening. So we're you've gotten a chance to see both the teaser trailer for Rings and Realms and the teaser to the teaser trailer.
Guys, we did it. We did our own teaser and our own teaser of a teaser.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely.
I shouldn't say Studio Lab.
Oh man, folks here at Studio Lab are amazing. They're doing just amazing work. So they're producing this show with us, just enabling us to do things I never thought
couldn't
was
have
possible.
Dreamed.
So just incredible stuff.
Yeah.
And so the Rings and Realms. So talk some about Rings and Realms and what people can expect. So the concept of the show.
Let's get rid of this image between us first. So
we've got the Balrog.
Balrog just looks very angry to talk about something fun and exciting.
Let's talk about something fun and exciting instead.
So the concept of the show of Rings of Realms is analysis a little bit broader. We're not going to do quite the deep dive because the idea is that people have never heard of Signum or our lectures or Other Minds and Hands or the Silmarillion, any of these things, might not even know what Second Age is.
Yeah.
So a little bit broader in terms of like setting the scene.
Yep.
But you try and stop Corey from doing a deep dive. So he'll still do a bit of a deep dive, but it's not interactive.
Yeah.
So it's produced.
Yeah, this is going to be a
Pre-recorded.
produced, pre-recorded, and edited discussion.
Episodic show.
Yeah, it's designed so it's like a reaction show in the sense that we're going to be releasing an episode after each episode drops of the Rings of Power. It's not a reaction show in the sense that we're not going to be focused on just
wasn't it great when
what I call gush and outrage, those kind of the two extremes of reaction shows. Instead, it's going to be an analysis show, which
we're emotive people. You'll still get a little of gush and outrage.
I'm not promising neutrality and dispassion. I'm just saying that's not going to be our.
We'll
focus.
Try to be more analytical.
Exactly. And this also, by the way, then influences the release cadence of Rings and Realms as well. The plan is, that one of the like sort of traditional modern internet things, right, is like to be first to have the release the show right after the thing drops and everything. That's not us. What we're going to be doing is, again, we're going to be doing some analysis. So the idea is you can watch the Rings of Power show when it comes out on Friday, whatever, and then you have a chance to respond, right, kind of work through your responses a little bit, there's a whole bunch of great
loads of reaction things are coming out.
So you can kind of work through it and think through it. And then we're going to drop the episode of Rings and Realms on probably Wednesday.
Probably Wednesday
is what we're
the
shooting
thinking.
for, so that you can watch it before, so you've had almost a week to process the episode that came out before. And then you watch the Rings and Realms episode. And that also helps to kind of springboard you into the next episode there as well.
But that's also still going to lead us into Other Minds and Hands. So
and Other Minds and Hands then will be the opportunity for us to discuss with you guys, to take questions and things. So, because again, there's no live element. It's not a podcast. It's not it's not going to be any chat room, right? It's just going to be it's going to be more like a TV show than it's going to be like one of our normal broadcasts. So we will still do our normal broadcasts so that we can do some
longer chats and a little more informal and have some guests and things like that. So the Rings and Realms show will be a bit more structured, very high production, because these guys are awesome. And we'll have some assets from Amazon, which we're excited to share. But really at the core of it is just going to be more of thoughtful analysis, digging into structured. Believe it or not, we're going to have a little bit of a format for these shows, but that will lead us into our informal discussion.
People have been teasing me when I said, the episodes are going to be 30 to 60 minutes long. James,
I was going to say me. I was like,
by saying, so this is a comedy routine then, right? No, because there are people editing this. Like that's the difference. There's going to be a script. There's going to be editors.
Well, there's going to be bullet points. There's not a script, and
more script than I usually.
And sadly, I won't be next to him. I'll be back in the UK for this, but I figure like I'm going to be like the GPS guiding you through your bit, and probably like the weatherman being dropped in to do a little segment on adaptation and then leaving. So it'll mostly be Corey giving you kind of a summary of what happened in that episode, me doing a little bit about adaptation, and then Corey doing a deep dive into
so things. The hope is that we can both serve as a kind of contextualization, because it's one of the things that I don't want to lose sight of, is that even Tolkien fans don't necessarily know the texts that this stuff is based on super well, right? I mean, because this is and I've talked about this, actually. This to me is one of the things that I'm most excited about, big picture, like when I step back from it and say, I in a sense, I don't care. I care less about the fact whether or not this show is good, then I am excited for the kind of impact that it can have. Because I think, based on my experience, what we've seen, not only with the Lord of the Rings films, but even with the Hobbit films, which were bad, and yet still had a positive impact on Tolkien fandom and Tolkien scholarship in general. And the thing that I think is really different about the Rings of Power show, the thing that I'm really excited about there is the reason I will be glad for it to have been, no matter whether it's good or not, is that there are a lot of people who like Tolkien. I'm sure there'll be many people who will be introduced to Tolkien for the first time, right? And that's great. But also great, in my mind, are the people who have read the Lord of the Rings and maybe The Hobbit, and who, because they're stimulated by the Rings of Power show, start reading Unfinished Tales, start reading the
Engage with the
Silmarillion,
rest of the world.
and really kind of getting into some of that stuff. So I don't want to take for granted that even somebody who may really be a lover of Tolkien, I don't want to take for granted that they know all this stuff, right? And so that's I don't know, half, I'm not sure percentages, but that's a big part of what we hope to accomplish in Rings and Realms, is to kind of contextualize. Yeah. So here's the episode you just watched. Let's talk about like how this fits, what this means in the Tolkien world, and what Tolkien stuff they're drawing on here. No, go ahead.
And because I can't remove all of this from like the actual production practice as well, this is also kind of an earth-shattering production. We know it's the most expensive thing. We know it's 5 seasons, hour-long episodes. This is one of the first structured things, the first thing structured like this in terms of an art production. So I'm hoping that analytically in my bit, I'll take a little bit of the behind the scenes. How did this happen? I might not have inside info necessarily unless they share it with us, but that is what I think piqued the interest of such a generation of filmmakers, is watching all of the extended edition, behind the scenes, Peter Jackson, the dialogues alongside. I really hope Amazon is taking advantage of that thirst and engaging in some of the behind the scenes and production practices, because we're all very curious. But I'm also really like, from a professional standpoint, how did you do this? Like, I want to see, and how are you utilizing the text and the information that we have and the shared imagery that we all have in this community of interpreters and receivers and dialoguers and triloguers and everything, and how is that being shown in a new way or a familiar way? So all of this stuff I hope is going to be able to come together in this standalone episode. And also it won't have dialogue between me and Corey, so that'll be different for us too. So we still want to have other minds and hands for the informal chat and the questions, but it might be a little more sporadic. It will hopefully still follow on from these episodes. But
yeah. And the other thing that I'm hoping, for me, that I'm hoping that we can accomplish through Rings and Realms is some deep dive, some analysis. And that, I mean by that, both some close analysis of the show itself, looking at some of the things that we see happening. Like we spent a really long time talking about a trailer, for instance, to take, a scene, a moment that really jumped out at us in the episode and say, look at what's going on here. Look at what the story is doing. But then also looking at some of the kind of deeper Tolkien connections, some stuff that, might not, be transparent to everybody, stuff that jumps out at me that I think is a really interesting engagement, because that's what I'm going to be looking at. What I'm going to be most interested to watch for, and what will make me most happy if it's good, will be the really kind of deep level interactions with Tolkien's themes and ideas. And so there will be times in each episode where I'm going to be wanting to draw attention to some of the things that I see there, some of the things that I thought were really meaningful in their relationship with Tolkien. Whether it's good or bad, whether I think it works well or doesn't work well. I'm sure there will be moments I'll be critical of as well. But yeah, that's the other thing that I'm really hoping for. So we'll have some segments where we do sort of deeper discussion of smaller things or ideas or themes, and then some kind of bigger picture overview stuff.
Because you can be certain that Amazon had the conversation, who is the audience? Who is this show for? And believe it or not, it is not for the people that have read absolutely everything and know every single detail about Tolkien and are well-versed in it. It is for them, but it's also for the rest of the world to enjoy. So being able to walk that line and pay service, but also keep it broad and open and accessible, is a real skill. And I think some people that say broad, open, and accessible, well, then clearly it's not. Hang on, it could be. Let's just give it a minute, because it could be a really good show that still somehow serves the spirit. Which again, like we said when we were in London, that was the thing that we were assured pretty quickly, that they understand the central themes of Tolkien. So I hope we see them represented.
Yeah.
We'll
No,
see.
I mean, it's going to be really interesting. And there are going to be things, I'm sure, that they're attempting to accomplish through their adaptation that, you know, might not work for me, you know, or for us. And, you know,
Or that last trailer that came out that was hinting at romance. No, thank you. I mean, there are definitely some editing choices that are happening in some of the trailers right now that we're pretty
Yes.
sure are not going to be in the show. They're doing that for engagement and reaction.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. If, yes, should Galadriel and Halbrand hook up, there will be strong language.
yes,
There will be.
there will be some words.
There will be. So yeah, but this is where I'm still waiting and seeing.
Yep.
I'm still waiting and seeing.
Open mind.
I shall not be drawn. I shall not be drawn into strong language in advance. We will see. We will see what happens. And I'm going to even attempt to this is why, I mean, you guys will remember, many of you will remember, those of you who have been you know, involved in our Signum community and in my podcast stuff since Hobbit film days and Riddles in the Dark days. You guys will remember how, if I could praise myself, valiantly I withheld conclusions until after the third film had come out. I mean, even after the first film, and there were reservations, and then the second film, and there was alarm, as it really seemed like it was not heading in a great direction at all. And you'll remember, I was ready to defend it. I was talking about ways in which this could still come out. I'm going to be doing that again, because in my mind, it's the only fair way. Once you give rein to the sort of the spirit, at least this is my own experience. Once I give rein to the spirit of complaint, once I start grumbling about things, I'm just grumbling.
It's a lot easier to keep grumbling.
Yeah, you just keep grumbling, and I'm not even really able to analyze anymore, because I'm just
looking for the wrong.
And I find myself in exactly. I'm looking for the wrong to continue the grumble. And I find myself in like an emotive rather than an analytical place entirely, right? And they're like different parts of my head. So it's hard to continue doing thoughtful analysis when I'm griping. So I do. So this is why I try not to gripe. This is why I don't voice a lot of concerns, and especially now, certainly before I've even seen the first episode, I'm not gonna do that. And I know, you know, again, lots of people.
Those are out there if you want them. We're just gonna avoid
you can
it for
find
now.
that, but that's not what I do. And so that's my little. Sorry, not sorry that I am not more critical, but that's not me, and that's not my whole philosophy of how to approach any of this stuff. So anyway, but Rings and Realms is going to be a really fun exploration. I think I'm really looking forward to doing that kind of a focused discussion. And of course,
I mean,
this playground is going to be a lot of fun.
Exactly. I'm like, we're used to like a dodgy PowerPoint slide. Like this game's going to be nice. So some practicalities. There's going to be its own YouTube channel, its own Twitter account. It will have its own website. We're still figuring all this out and the information element. So I would just say keep an eye on Twitter, Rings and Realms, because that's probably going to have the most.
Yeah. So we would ask folks to go and give Rings and Realms a follow on social media platforms and on YouTube for sure.
Instagram,
subscribe to the YouTube
Twitter,
channel.
YouTube.
So the YouTube channel is where it's primarily going to live here. You know, for this first season, and then we'll see. But we're having them, as I say, as separate channels and stuff right now. So encourage people to check that out.
And the first episode drops on the 31st.
31st. So we're doing an intro episode first. We're not prescient. Well, we will have seen the first episodes by then, but we are certainly not doing an analysis episode because they will come after us with tar and feathers if we do. Before it drops, I mean. So what's going to be dropped on the 31st of August is going to be an intro episode where we talk about, again, more just kind of setting the stage. We'll be talking about some of the issues that we discussed discussed way back in the first episode of Other Minds and Hands, thinking about adaptation and thinking about, I'm going to be talking some about, sort of the Second Age and trying to kind of set the context within Tolkien's writings and what we know and what we don't know. Not about the show. I mean, from Tolkien, what we know and what we don't know about the Second Age and stuff.
Again, as if no one was familiar with this at all. They're just going to have a general overview of the tone of how we talk and what we're looking at. The text, the show, adaptation.
Yeah, and we'll be using some visuals and things from the released materials and stuff like that. But so that will be the intro episode. That's going to drop on the 31st, as we said, and then we'll be
most likely every Wednesday after that.
Double episode first time, I suppose. And that was my first thought. I was like, oh man. Oof, okay, but yeah. There'll be a lot to talk about.
Let's just say this season is a learning curve for everyone. So
yeah,
but we'll be around. We'll keep you posted, but definitely follow all of the new Rings and Realms stuff, and we'll keep you in the loop.
Absolutely. All right, so that's what's happening here. Don't forget, we won't be around next week, so no live broadcast next week because we'll be traveling home from New York, but it'll be right around the time of the normal broadcast, so it won't be able to be available for that. The next week, what's the next week?
I think that's
what's the date? Is that
the 31st? I think.
Is it the 31st?
Yeah, I think that's our first episode.
Well, so it is. Well, that seems like a thing we should do. Well, we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm driving down to Philadelphia that day. We'll see how we go.
I might be somewhere else apparently. So who knows?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
We'll cross that bridge. So basically, watch Twitter. Well, on all of our sites.
Much unfolding. Like I literally just found out about a place I might be a couple hours ago. So who knows? Much changing quickly here. So this show, Other Minds and Hands, we're gonna need to be flexible with because
we have to be
trying to fit it in around a whole bunch of other things. But anyway,
but we will try to collate it all. I do think Twitter and probably the Rings and Realms website and the YouTube channel are your best bets because we'll put all the information in those descriptions so you can see once we have a schedule and something a little bit more regular, it'll all be posted there.
Yeah.
Thanks, gang.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for joining us for today. Man, I'm just still like
buzzing
from
Remember when John Howe was here?
Yeah.
Remember
I know, right? Holy cow. Man. Yeah,
and I hope we can have him back. We were really keen to say before we started of just this is scratching the surface of a general conversation of adaptation. So hopefully we can bring him in to talk, because I would love to do a comparison of like, what was this like with Peter Jackson? What is this like now? But I don't know how much he'd like to do that as an artist.
Yeah, it'd be tricky. Yeah, it'd be tricky. But anyway,
process.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate you, and we'll definitely say we definitely one way or another, sometime or other, we'll be figuring it out. We'll definitely
you'll hear from us soon.
Be connecting with you guys because I'd love this opportunity to be able to talk with you folks, and there'll be so much to talk about. So anyway, more soon, and stay tuned for the first episode at the very least. That is certainly happening on the